One of our projects on the Henning homestead was to clear the land where we put this garden and our expanded pasture. In this next segment, we visit a sawmill near Brandon, Minnesota, where the operator, Kyle Sands, helps us to square the original oak logs that we took down. Kyle, tell me, how did you happen to get into running a sawmill?
Well, my grandfather was a farmer and a logger growing up, so before he went into the ministry, he decided he was going to be a logger, and so he's been cutting trees forever. Even while he was a pastor, he still would cut. And so when he bought his land up by Akeley, he picked up a circle mill. And he's been running that thing. I've been running it with him off and on for about 20 years, I suppose.
And then working here, you run a bandsaw, right?
Yes, yeah.
So explain the difference between the two saws.
The circle mill that I ran with my grandfather is, I think, from 1930 or 1925, something like that. So it's a pretty old mill. It's PTO powered. It actually was originally powered on a belt, a flat belt, off of, say, a steam engine or a tractor or something like that, but he bought a stationary gas engine for it. So he's got that set up with V-belt drive and everything like that. So anyway, that's got about a 52-inch circle blade on it, just like your table saw. Instead of a 10-inch blade, this will be about 52-inch diameter.
So if it's 52-inch diameter, it could probably cut about a 2-foot thick tree. Would that be about right?
Yeah. The thickest tree, actually I took a tree off of this property here that I brought up there for him to cut, and that one, I believe the diameter of the base was around 24 to 28 inches, something like that. Really what you end up doing is you don't take the first cuts, you don't take the full width of the log, you take the side of it, so then you end up flipping it around and take another side, so you gradually cut it down.
Sure.
But yes, you can handle, on the band mill, you can handle a bigger log just because you have a wider throat opening, typically. So on the band mill that I've got, I can do, the specs on that thing are about 30 inches, and I believe we ran a 32-inch log through it on one of the first logs they did on it.
Now, you've had the bandsaw for how long?
About 2 years.
So, were there any surprises or things that you thought maybe were different when you first started using it after working with a circle saw for so long?
Well, the main difference is on the circle mill, the carriage that the log sits on moves through the blade. On the band mill, the blade is on the carriage and actually moves through the log. The log is stationary on the band mill, and in this case, and of course on my grandpa's mill, everything is powered. So you've got just a lever that'll allow that carriage to move back and forth. And so on the band mill, you've got a throttle which engages the blade. It's just a simple centrifugal clutch to engage the blade, and then you've got a push. I've managed to get about 10 sharpenings per blade. What happens is the blade will fatigue and eventually break.
Sure.
So it's not that you wear the blade out by sharpening it too much, it's just that there's enough micro cracks that form in the blade and then they finally just break on you. The main difference between the circle mill and the band saw, as far as the blades are concerned, other than the obvious differences, is the fact that a circle blade is going to be about a 1/4 inch thick.
Oh.
Whereas the band blade is about an 1/8 inch thick. So what ends up happening is every pass you make on a log, on a band blade, you're going to lose 1/8 of an inch of material, but you're going to lose a 1/4 inch in the circle mill. So your yield is a lot higher in a band mill.
Oh.
You also typically will end up with a smoother finish on the log, or on the material when you're done. Like in this case, these boards here they're definitely not a finished board. They're not planed, But if you were to look at this, compare this to a circle mill blade, it's much smoother. There'll be a lot rougher finish. In fact, you'll see the curves of where the blade actually went into the log. Here is going to be the board as it comes off the mill. In this case, you can kind of see the pattern of the circle blade, because this was cut on a circle mill. You can see the discoloration. There's a little bit of discoloration from some water that sat on it. And of course, there's obviously some knots and some other imperfections in this piece. But if I were to plane this down, it would be very similar to the finished board over here. And then you can also see that the thickness difference. This is the 1-inch rough cut versus a 3/4 inch finished. But the nice thing is once you run this through a planer and get it all cleaned up, it doesn't look very good right now, but it'll clean up quite nicely like that other board. So
beautiful wood.
Yes.
I see you've got them stacked in a certain way. Can you tell us a little bit about the stacking and
Sure.
What is the terminology for that technique? I see you have little skinny boards in between.
These are called stickers. Each of these, and basically these are just scraps off of a board that was cut, and I cut a bunch of 1-inch thick boards, and I just took these and ripped them on the table saw to make these stickers. And basically the technique is you just want to stack them so that when the lumber is green, you want air to be able to circulate all the way around the boards so that they dry relatively evenly. This is just an air drying method. It's a green stacked batch of lumber, and all it is I've got 3 supports on this. Actually, I might have 4. Yes, I have 4 supports in this, and you'd want to try and maintain the evenness so that when you stack the very first layer, you don't want the middle supports to be higher than the outer supports, so you end up with a bowed, starting with a bowed piece of lumber. Otherwise, the whole stack is going to be bowed. So once you get everything relatively level, or at least straight across from support to support, you also want to have a little bit of an angle so when the rain does fall on it, it will shed. So that's kind of the idea. Basically, you just run your stack along the entire length of the support, and put a little gap in between. I don't measure it, but I just put a 3/4 of an inch, and then I put a sticker above each support. Run the next layer, and you just build it up that way. The gray boards here actually are boards I cut last year, and these boards, the last 4 rows here, are boards I cut this spring.
Now you've got another big stack up there. Is that also spruce?
Those stacks over there are actually walnut, ash, and some birch. On this particular property, that's the main trees I have are basswood, oak, and ash. And I do have 1 large walnut tree, and then I've got several little saplings of walnut that have popped up in the last few years. But there's also some aspen, poplar, quaking aspen is what I've got here. But primarily those are the 3 or the 4 big ones you're going to have is the walnut, the oak, and the ash, and then the basswood. The oaks are going to have bur oak, and you also have red oak. And red oak is typically more favored for woodworkers. It generally has a nicer grain to it, and it's the kind you're going to get at Menards or any other, most of the time at any kind of a woodworking or a wood supply company. The birch and the black ash are from my grandfather's place up by Akeley, and then the green ash is from my dad's place back down in southern Minnesota.
I bet it's kind of a fun challenge to see how many boards you can get out of a log, though, isn't it? Because you have to keep turning it different ways.
Yep. When you start out, cutting on a circle mill and cutting on a bale mill are slightly different in how you start. But basically, your first cut is going to determine, it's going to determine a flat face. Everything else is based on that. And once you flip the board, you want to then try to maximize your yield by cutting as little of the actual usable log versus cutting off the rounded portion that isn't any good for anything. The third cut that you're going to make is actually going to be your overall width of the board. Say, for example, if the last cut is around 10 inches, that's going to determine how many single boards you're going to get out of it after that. Because once you make that third flip, which is the 4th side, that's where that thickness now becomes the height,
Yeah.
and that's going to determine how many boards you're going to get out of it. Whether if you're going to go 3/4 inch boards, then you're going to get more. If you get 1 inch or even 2 inch boards, obviously you're going to get less. But there's a scale on the mill that takes into account not only the cut, the board you're taking, but the cut that the blade itself takes.
Wow. Now, this is maybe a silly question, but I noticed your spruce boards were just open to the air and
Yep.
exposed to the sky. But now your hardwood, you've got the tin over. Can
Yep.
you explain the reason for that?
Ideally, I'd have tin over everything.
Oh.
I don't have the tin. But the reason I put the tin on these is because these have been curing for about, like I say, this pile probably for about 2 years. The pile on the other pile probably for about 4 years.
It's kind of neat to be able to make something out of the work of your hands.
Yeah. Yep.
Be really interesting to see what you ultimately do with some of this.
Yes. Yes. That's the question. I made a couple of projects out of some wood that I've had finished planed, that I've made out of the walnut and the ash, just to try it out, and they look really nice.
Well, this has been really fascinating, and thanks so much for sharing your time with us.
You bet.
Telling us all about this.
I want to go make sure this way.
There we go.
Okay.